Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Daniel Gallen. They have turned the lights off behind us here in Beaver Stadium. It is past 2:30 a.m. on Sunday, but we just wrapped up our coverage for the night here in the press box, got some stories up online, and of course, now we're back with our postgame podcast. We'd imagine most of you are catching this on Sunday morning, and the Nittany Lions are coming off of a really impressive victory, rebounding from their loss to Ohio State. 35-6, the final score here in Beaver Stadium on Saturday night in front of a whiteout crowd of more than 110,000. The Nittany Lions go 4 for 4 on touchdown drives before halftime. They end up leading 28-0 at intermission and put it on cruise control from there, winning 35-6. And Daniel, you, Mark Brennan, me, we were all wondering what this team might look like coming off of an emotional, painful, stinging loss to those Ohio State Buckeyes. And we got a pretty emphatic answer early on and over the course of 4 quarters here on Saturday evening.
Penn State answered a lot of the questions that I think we had in terms of how would they bounce back? How are they looking towards this new college football landscape where the one loss to Ohio State doesn't necessarily eliminate you from postseason contention? And is this team going to be like we've seen in 2022 and 2023 where they found stuff to play for down the stretch? They didn't roll over. They didn't start looking towards the future. We were wondering if we were going to see this type of team again in 2024, and they answered it pretty quickly that the answer was yes. This was a team that knows it has something to play for, is still pushing forward, and still has goals that it wants to reach.
We'll talk about some of the bigger picture items coming out of this matchup before we say goodbye later. But getting to that first half, Daniel, which was just exactly what you could have asked for if you're James Franklin and company. Defensively, you gave up a long drive to start the game. More than 7 minutes we saw Washington on the field. And when you go back to the last game, when Ohio State's offense was on the field for the final 5 minutes, you're thinking, okay, what's going on here? That ended up being the really the most impressive drive of the day for Washington. I mean, it was a 42-yard drive over 7 minutes, but they never got to 40 again until late in the game on a field goal drive. By the end of the first half, we saw them punt multiple times. We saw them miss a field goal off the upright. We also saw them throw an interception that Jalen Reed came down with, and he's got 3 interceptions in the last 4 games at the safety spot. And meanwhile, Daniel, while that's all happening and Washington's having some frustrating moments offensively coming off of a win against USC last week, you've got Penn State going 9 plays, 72 yards in 4 minutes for a touchdown. Then 14 plays, 80 yards in 6.5 minutes for a touchdown. Then 8 plays for 58 yards in 4 minutes and a touchdown. And then we see them get in a 2-minute situation with the opportunity to get the ball coming out in the second half. And we know how they like to double dip there. They were able to get that done at the very end of the first half. Julian Fleming catches a touchdown, 8 yards from Drew Aller with about 20 seconds remaining in the first half. It was Fleming's first score as a Nittany Lion. It's pretty cool that it happens here in a whiteout setting. And it was the first touchdown scored by a Nittany Lions receiver in Big Ten action. We're in Game 6 in conference play here. But the story early on was what they got done on the ground in goal line situations. We didn't see them do it against the Buckeyes, and that was obviously a glaring situation last Saturday as we had our postgame podcast. This time around, Bo Prabula checks in early. He gets the first touchdown run on the first drive, and then Tyler Warren, the man that does it all for this team, a couple 2-yard touchdown runs, including one where he leaps, throws the ball over the goal line, and gets it done with that 6'6", 260-pound frame. What did you make of Penn State's offensive efforts and really how they approached things when they got near the goal line in that first half?
I think the common sentiment from some of our readers and our followers on social media was that they wish they could have seen some of that last week against Ohio State. When you talk about getting close to the goal line and converting, putting the ball in Tyler Warren's hands. I asked Warren after the game if they took any extra satisfaction in being able to get that done that close to the goal line after being unable to do it last week against Ohio State. And in kind of classic Tyler Warren fashion, he was just kind of like, no, like that's a new game. We have our game plan. We know what we want to do down by the goal line. He said that there wasn't like a priority to get him the ball down there. Anthony Donka had a similar sentiment where it didn't necessarily mean anything extra to him to be able to punch it in down there. But I do think that coming out of that Ohio State game, even beyond the micro of that one game, that one sequence, being down one score and trying to get a touchdown. Big picture, you kind of thought they might have to do that again at some point this year if you want to win one of these games, make the college football playoff. It might come down to something like that. So to see them be able to get that done, put it on tape, and maybe dispel any worry that people might have had about Penn State in short yardage situations, I do think that was a benefit.
And you look at this team, and by the way, Bo Prabula, that was his only really touch of the game. He didn't throw a pass today. He had one run, and that was an 8-yard touchdown run off the left side. We did see him involved a little bit early. He was kind of an afterthought and was basically tucked away for the final push of that Ohio State matchup, but he popped up early on offense. It wasn't a consistent theme throughout the night, but Prabula made an impact, obviously. And then Tyler Warren, I mean, what a day for him. We just talked about those 2 touchdown runs, but he finished with a team high 8 catches for 75 yards. And along that process, he is now the all-time leader for Penn State at tight end for single season receptions. He's got 59 of those now through 9 matchups. And then the yardage total, Daniel, I don't know the exact number there. It's creeping up towards 700 yards, though. In both cases, he surpassed Mike Gesicki's totals from the 2017 season. Gesicki obviously went on to become a second-round NFL draft pick. He's doing good things this season for the Cincinnati Bengals as an NFL veteran. Right before we got on this podcast, Daniel, you wrapped up a story on Tyler Warren, another memorable night, and really adding another chapter to what has been a remarkably impressive senior season. I would call it a breakout. I think we already knew that Tyler Warren was going to be a major factor, but for him to be on a national level and clearly the kind of guy that makes the engine run offensively for beyond quarterback Drew Aller, it's just been a heck of a storyline. He's not done yet, but James Franklin took a moment in the press conference to really make his case for a couple major awards, and Franklin went so far as to say he wouldn't understand how someone else would win these awards. And there are other legitimate candidates involved for them, but Warren has another signature night to point to here.
I think there's a lot of people out there who wouldn't blink twice if Travis Hunter wins the Hornung Award this year with what he does at Colorado. But no, I double checked. That's 681 receiving yards for Warren this year. So that's 59 catches, 681. He has, I think, 3 receiving touchdowns, or 4. I think it's 4 and 4 or 4 and 3 for rushing and receiving. So he's been able to find the end zone a decent amount. But yeah, you talk about the postseason awards. He's a semifinalist for the Mackey, which is the best tight end. There's 8 semifinalists. I think Bowling Green's Harold Fannin Jr. is the top competition there. And then the Hornung Award, he's one of 3 finalists along with Travis Hunter. Hornung is most versatile. With Travis Hunter and Louisville's Isaac Brown. I think you look at the bodies of work there, and it's kind of a Warren Hunter matchup with what both do on a weekly basis. And James Franklin is, we've seen this since August, and how he's talked about Tyler Warren, about how he's wanted to put him out there. He wants people to take notice, whether that's in the Big Ten or nationally or these award voters. And I think that Warren is someone who is really deserving. You watch what he does. He's someone that teams really want to key on. But at the same time, as Drew Aller explained it tonight, the way that Penn State cycles through its personnel groupings, utilizes motions, does a little bit of eye candy. They love doing that thing where they put the 3 tight ends split out wide with Nick Singleton behind them and Trey Wallace all by his lonesome on the left side. I think that there's going to be a tendency breaker there at some point soon that could be really interesting. But Penn State throws all of this for you. So you can't really be like, all right, we're going to do bracket coverage on 44 every down and live that way. And then on top of that, they've got other guys that can beat you. We saw Trey Wallace have a really, really nice game today after the wide receivers were pretty non-existent against Ohio State. So Warren is really the beneficiary of how Penn State is running its offense under Andy Kotelnicki. But at the same time, I mean, you watch him play, and it's just the individual effort is ridiculous. I mean, he had the one diving catch that was ruled incomplete. I think it was an incompletion, but still that effort to be in that position and make it close. He had one catch over the middle where he catches it, and a Washington defender just bounces off of him. immediately. Like it's definitely something else. I mean, I think that when you think about these big bodied tight ends, you think about them kind of playing like basketball players, posting up in the red zone. But these past couple of weeks, Warren has showed that you get him the ball in space, you get him the ball in the open field, he's going to make something happen at 6'6", 260. It's really, really rare. And I think that Penn State fans should really keep that in mind as they watch these final however many games are left in the season.
With his physical stature, again, I'll remind people, he's got a 15-game streak now with a catch of at least 14 yards in every single one of those games. He had another 21-yard gain today. He has 10 20-plus yard catches on the season at 6'6", 260. It's just very different. And when you talk about his importance to this passing attack, well, Daniel, he's got 30 more catches than the next man up on that list for Penn State. And nobody else even has 30 catches on this team right now. So he is at 59 receptions. Harrison Wallace is next at 29 catches on the season. As you said, Wallace had himself a nice performance today, was delivering on his targets. He had the highest yardage total for himself since the season opener when he went over 100 yards at West Virginia before halftime. He had 84 yards on the night today. But just the significance of that he's got 30 more catches than everybody else. And the next man up on that list has 29 total catches on the season. He's got 200 more receiving yards than anybody else on that list too. We'll talk more about Tyler Warren, I'd imagine, when we resettle with Mark Brennan on Monday. We'll be talking about Warren for the rest of this year. Let's face that. But so Aller puts Penn State up 28-0 with that touchdown pass as time's ticking down in the half. Julian Fleming scores it. And you get to halftime, Aller, I believe, was 14 of 18, 140 yards. This was the sixth time in 7 games now, Daniel, where he is at 70-plus on the completion percentage. He did that only 4 times in 13 total games last year as a first-year starter, as a sophomore. It may not always look like USC, where he's pushing towards 400 yards and he's making a lot of big throws down the field. But this was the exact steadying forward momentum performance that you'd want from Drew Aller after a rough patch in the road for everybody last Saturday. He picks up kind of where he left off and in that first half against Wisconsin when he was highly efficient that day. And I think even though you're not looking at this offense and saying, Drew Aller, the former 5-star, is putting up huge numbers, and he's the guy that everyone has to focus in on. I think we're getting a real sense that when this offense is in its rhythm and he's orchestrating it, they're going to be a tough out. And that's even with acknowledging that they don't have the alpha receiver presence that a lot of the other, college football playoff contenders may have. They have an alpha. They have Tyler Warren. But we saw Drew Aller today being smart with the football, being really good at avoiding pressure. There was no sacks, and I thought overall the blocking was really strong ahead of him. But there were at least 2 or 3 plays where last year he may find himself in a sack. And so I think the body of work for Drew Aller, the ability to keep himself clean, the ability to keep the ball out of harm's way and distributing the football, which he got back to doing today, that kind of took a back seat in some ways last week, and that was just kind of an offensive failure. I think you really got to view the Ohio State game for Drew Aller as the outlier here, and that's a hell of a competition. Overall, you're getting steady, clean play, and I think these are also the performances that when they stack up and NFL talent evaluators get a look, there's a lot to like about it, even if you don't see some of the gaudy statistics that other passers across America are putting up on a more weekly basis.
I think the completion percentage number has just been really, really big this year, because it was down around 60% last year, and to raise it above 70 and keep it there on a weekly basis, I think that just shows the decision making, being in control, taking what's there, just keeping this offense on the field and moving downfield. You mentioned it on the podcast on Thursday that average depth of target is going down. His yards per attempt is going down a little bit too. I kind of think that was always going to happen. You get that small sample size through those first couple games in non-conference play, and things look really, really good. But I think that even in the bigger sample size, the fact that completion percentage number isn't changing, I think that just shows the consistency that he's had. There were some times tonight where I thought that he could have ripped it downfield and taken some of those deep shots, We haven't really seen that the past couple of weeks, and that's something we've talked about. They tried to manufacture a touch for Omari Evans early on a reverse, and they try to get him into space and use that 4.31 speed. And he got a marginal gain out of it, took a big hit, got someone ejected for targeting. But I think that there's still a lot that this offense can do as we get on the stretch. But yeah, I just think Aller is just playing at a really good level right now. It's you've seen his development. He's confident out there. He was jawing with Carson Bruner, the Washington linebacker, after he took a hit. He was pointing at the scoreboard in his face. I mean, I think that that's the mark of someone who is really in control, really knows what they're doing. I jokingly tweeted about it, but I know, and I've made this comparison earlier in the year, but he looks like 2017 Carson Wentz at times to me, just when Wentz was playing at that MVP level for the Eagles, where he's able to escape in the pocket. He has that big frame, but is still athletic, and then is keeping his eyes downfield and looking to throw. He did take an unnecessary hit, I thought, from Bruner, but he popped right back up, got in his face, pointing at the scoreboard, jawing with him. I mean, that's what you want to see from your leader, from your quarterback. So I've just been really impressed with Wentz with Aller this year. It's late, and I'm really interested in what else they can do moving forward. You would have liked to see some of this last week against Ohio State, but it does seem like they'll get another chance at a marquee opponent as long as they take care of business these last couple of weeks.
We mentioned the ball distribution. We talked about what Warren did, what Wallace did at receiver. You had Julian Fleming with a touchdown catch. He also had an 11-yard reception. You had Liam Clifford with a 20-yard catch. And you did have Nick Singleton involved, especially in that first half. And let's get to that backfield note here, because the fellow five-star from that 2022 class in the backfield, along with Drew Aller, is Nick Singleton. And we have seen him working through something since the UCLA game, which he was sidelined for. Hasn't been nearly as effective as a rusher in Big Ten conference action since missing that matchup, but he has been really important as a receiver. 3 catches, 14 yards today, pretty modest performance, but he was getting it done on the ground early, Daniel. I think he had 30 yards rushing on that first touchdown drive for Penn State. He ended up with 45 yards on 7 carries before halftime. Came out of the gates with a kickoff return for a touchdown in the second half, but that was ultimately wiped off the board by a holding call that took place. He got 1 carry. I think it was a 9-yard pickup in the third quarter, and he was not seen from again in the game. We had some trouble locating him on the sideline. James Franklin was asked about Singleton's status afterward and said, "You're barking up the wrong tree. Maybe check practice on Wednesday, see if Singleton's out there." I'd imagine we may follow up with him on Monday before we get to practice on Wednesday on Singleton's status. But there's a shroud of mystery around Singleton this year, although he has been producing at a different level than last year. Like we said, hasn't been as effective on the ground, and we'll get to more on the ground game in a moment. But if Nick Singleton's out of the equation, it's Purdue next week. I know it's a 1-8 football team. People would probably say, if you got to wrap him in bubble wrap, do it. Get him ready for the final stretch. But it's unfortunate because when we got through the first 5 games of this season, Daniel, and you're coming off of that Illinois game, and he's doing some big things, blocking guys, catching passes. I mean, he was really looking very much like a clone of the 2022 freshman All-American player that we got a chance to see a couple of years ago. Don't know if he's going to be able to be what we witnessed in September again, but we do know that this is a better football squad when he's doing his thing as a receiver, as a rusher. And as we saw tonight, he's a threat on special teams.
I thought that Nick Singleton was back to that Nick Singleton we saw the first 4 weeks of the season tonight. 7 carries, 45 yards. That's 6.4 yards per carry. You look at what he'd done over the past 3 games, and that Wisconsin game, 12 carries for 49 yards, 4.1 yards per carry. That was the high water mark. And if he gets 1 more carry, he probably surpasses that 49 yards. I thought that he looked good early. It looked like he had the juice. They did some nice things getting him out in space to the edge in terms of a toss pitch from Aller, a speed option with Pribula. It did look like they were trying to get him into space. And when he was in space, he was able to accelerate and get away from guys. I mean, that kickoff return was like vintage Nick Singleton. That was the Nick Singleton that every game I think we expect to go in and see. but we hadn't been seeing these past couple of weeks. So it's tough. I mean, he told us after the Wisconsin game that he'd been banged up. We know he missed that UCLA game. Tonight, it looked like that maybe that stuff was behind him a little bit. And I think the fact that they were feeding him as much as they were, he only had 6 carries last week against Ohio State. He had 6 in the first half, had 7 for the game. I think there was a concerted effort to get him back involved, and it looked like he was going to be taking advantage of it. So it's a tough break for Penn State. Singleton also should have had a touchdown catch too, on a ball that came out a little high and hot from Drew Aller, got his hands on it, couldn't reel it in too. So we'll see. Like you said, I know that James Franklin would prefer that we wait until Wednesday for our questions and everything, but I would not be surprised if it pops up on in however many hours from now on Monday.
Yeah, Singleton have 7 total touchdowns on the season, 4 as a receiver, and 3 as a rusher. Could have had another today, but again, it was nullified by a penalty on that kickoff return. And when you look at this backfield, Katron Allen ended up getting more touches than we probably anticipated today. 20 carries for 98 yards. A nice surprise toward the end of this game. It was Corey Smith stepping up as the third running back involved, and he had a 78-yard run that almost reached pay dirt. I mean, that would have been a hell of a story toward the end of a whiteout for him to go all the way. They ended up not scoring a touchdown. This was the final possession. It was 35-6, I think, at that point. But in this case, you saw Corey Smith get a few additional rushes. They gave him a chance to maybe finish out the drive, but he had 95 yards on 5 carries. And so this is an interesting development because Quentin Martin Jr. had been running back 3 when available. He was not available the last couple of weeks. Then he was back off the injury report this week, seemingly was ready to go. But it was the other freshman in his college debut who gets a chance and shines with an opportunity. And we'll see if Singleton were to miss time, what that might mean for Corey Smith, but gives us just something else to think about in this backfield, which is, beyond Singleton and Allen, there's been some changes over the course of this season with Cam Wallace's injury and then Quentin Martin not being available. And now here you go, Corey Smith trying to step up. And as we discussed, if there's a chance next year you get into it and Nick Singleton and Katron Allen have moved on, there's going to be a whole lot of jockeying for what comes next in this running back room. And whatever you can do during the final stretch here now, whether you're Quentin Martin or you're Corey Smith, could serve you well and serve as a springboard.
When Corey Smith was out there, it was kind of a surprise, like, because it's late in the game, we're all getting stuff organized for post game everything, and then you look up and 24 gets the carry, and they say Corey Smith, and it's like, oh, that's new. We haven't had that before, and then showed a lot of juice on that run through the left side for 78 yards. When he was out there, it made me think about what James Franklin said before the season in terms of using Corey Smith and Quentin Martin as one player. In terms of stretching out, you've got 4 games available to each. That's 8 total. Let's get through the entire year with both of them preserving their red shirt, and then get to the postseason. Then all bets are off in terms of usage. The Quentin Martin, Corey Smith dynamic reminds me a little bit of Nick Singleton and Katron Allen in terms of you have the in-state guy who is the super highly rated recruit. Quentin Martin wasn't a 5-star, but he's still a top 100 guy. He's someone that people have known about for a long, long time. And then you have the out-of-state kid come in who is, in his own right, is a really good player, with his own set of accolades. But that in-state guy just has something a little extra with that recruiting ranking, with that familiarity. And so I think that, at one point, I think James Franklin this year was kind of like, don't forget about Corey Smith. Like, he's done some nice things. He is coming along. He's someone that they like. I was really impressed with what we saw. He was someone that we'd seen a lot in the camp circuit the past couple of years. And so we got to see what he's able to do as a receiver, as a runner, as an athlete. And I think that's what we saw in that little bit he was out there. He had that same thing we talked about with Quentin Martin with when he got his real workload against Kent State, where it seemed like Corey Smith was trying to get to the edge a couple times and couldn't quite get there. It's a little bit different than Milwaukee area high schools against Washington, but I think that's promising, and you hope that that's something that can boost confidence not only for Corey Smith but for that room as a whole, and so that as you move forward, that when someone goes in, no matter what time of game it is, they can feel confident to make something happen.
And even if he doesn't get more opportunities here in Big Ten play, he can still, if he were called into action, say in the postseason for whatever reason, he can still lean on the fact that he had a 78-yard run in front of 110,000 people. Maybe not have been 110,000 people still in the stadium by then, but you get my point. He's got something now he can lean on. Last year, you had two freshman running backs who didn't see a single game snap, and you had Trey Potts, the veteran who transferred in, holding down that RB3 role throughout. Little bit of a different scenario playing out. Quentin Martin Jr. at 3 games on the year. And then with Corey Smith, he could conceivably play the next 3 games if they wanted to do that. And he still wouldn't burn his red shirt because this was his first appearance. You can play 4 without burning red shirt. And then, as you said, you get to the postseason and you got a lot more flexibility in terms of freshman usage. It took us a while to get there, but let's dive into what Abdul Carter accomplished here on Saturday night. I just wrote a story on that one. And I mean, he's been catching fire. We discussed this, what he's accomplished in conference play. He had 2 sacks last week. He was one of the true standouts in that matchup with Ohio State. Well, he had 2 more sacks tonight, including one on a 3rd and goal that forced Washington to take a field goal opportunity while they were down 25 points. And then he also had 4 tackles for loss collectively on the night. It's the second time in 2024 Big Ten play that he's had 4 tackles for loss. He also did that against Illinois, and you start to stack up the numbers, Daniel, and it's just exactly what you had hoped for with this transition from a guy who's been a freshman All-American, been a first-team All-Big Ten performer at linebacker. If you move into this position, you want All-American kind of results, and he's giving that to them, and he's validating some of the midseason top 5, top 10 draft projection we have seen. He's matching that.
We were talking about it, but before we started recording, about how these first round draft picks that Penn State has had from the edge rusher spot have been good players, Odafe Owe, Chop Robinson, but they haven't had the big counting stats at Penn State. We know that Owe's was well documented that last year he was here. And then Chop Robinson was someone where it was always, well, look at how he's affecting everything else. Look at how they're playing him. Look at how he's getting off the ball and forcing the quarterback off his spot. I mean, with Abdul, you've got the best of all the worlds right now. He is getting off the ball. He's affecting the rest of the offensive line, creating opportunities for the rest of the defensive linemen. But then he's also getting his, which has just been really, really impressive to see. He is just so gifted. He has the ability to get off the ball in the way that he does. It's just been 8 sacks, 15 and a half tackles for loss right now. Like, that's what you want to see. That's when you could look at someone's their stats and from their college career, and you're like, oh yeah, like that'll play. You marry it with the tape, you marry it with the athletic testing, and it makes that whole picture of that top 5 potential draft pick edge rusher. I mean, he's just really, really fun to watch right now. He's locked in. And at the same time, you still see the plays that he leaves out there. He had that 4th down last week against Ohio State. I think there was one other time where he got into the secondary or got into the backfield tonight, couldn't get the quarterback to the ground, and easily could have had another sack there. So it's just been really fun to watch him clicking in over in Big Ten play, getting comfortable, having things come easier to him. It's just I think it's a testament to him, testament to Deion Barnes for the job he's done developing him, and just for Tom Allen and this defense to put him in position to make some things happen.
He had a forced fumble that Washington recovered on their own. He also had a QB hurry that was a pretty key one where he blew up the quarterback. And he had you talk about those numbers, 8 sacks and 15 and a half tackles for loss. The remarkable thing here is when you look back at what he has done in Big Ten play, it's almost all of it. 7 sacks, 13 tackles for loss in 6 Big Ten games. It's almost like he was on his training wheels in non-conference play, and I don't think his snap totals certainly weren't as high as they were, getting away from West Virginia and blowing out Kent State. He's been more of a 4-quarter presence, certainly in the Big Ten, but those numbers are really impressive when you compare to what he did last year. He was a first-team All-Big Ten performer last year, but I think a lot of us maybe were left looking for more from Abdul Carter as a sophomore, considering what he showed as a freshman. He got to November last year and had 1 sack on the season. He finished last season with 5.5 totals tackles for loss, which was 5 fewer than his freshman year. Well, Well, he's already got 10 more tackles for loss in 9 games than he had in 13 games last year. He tied LeVar Arrington today, among a few others, Yetur Gross-Matos as well. 19 sacks in their career. That's 11th all time in Penn State history. His next sack, which would give him 9, would push him into top 10 for single season performances. No one has gotten double-digit sack totals in almost a decade, going back to 2015 in a Nittany Lions uniform. I like his odds to get there. And so I think with Abdul Carter, it is all systems go right now. Kobe King called him a game changer. We've heard from members of this coaching staff how it's becoming very obvious that opposing coordinators and coaches are scheming with him in mind. And when you have to do that, you're taking stuff off your plate that you'd otherwise be able to get into. So I think the other defender we have to make sure we mention here is Jalen Reed. This is 3 times in 4 weeks where he comes down with an interception. I'll have to go back and check the games, the snap reports here, but he has been a remarkable kind of Iron Man for their defense over the course of this year. He tied for the lead with tackles today with Kobe King. They both had 7 tackles. King, by the way, back-to-back games with a sack. But Jalen Reed leads this team on the season in tackles. He's now leads this team on the season with interceptions. And, oh, by the way, he just never leaves the field. I think in 2 of the last 3 matchups, he played every single defensive snap, and felt like that may have been the case today as well. I know Zachy Wheatley's played at a very high level. He's been a really strong open field tackler for them. But Jalen Reed, to me, from week 1, what he did at West Virginia to where we are now, coming off the whiteout game, it's just week to week to week. You can hang your hat on him being there.
When you talk about this safety group and losing KJ Winston and what that did with them, I think that in KJ Winston's absence, you've seen Zachy Wheatley raise his game. I think that he has, there's been an opportunity or a moment ahead of him, and he stepped up to meet it. I think with Jalen Reed, it's been the thing where he was already here from the jump, like from West Virginia, that for him, this wasn't like I need to step up and do something, because this happened. For him, it was, I'm here, I'm doing this. This is going to be my season. And that's really, really shown through over the course of this year. You watch him pre-snap, he's directing traffic. We know how cerebral he is of a player from what his coaches and teammates have said. And then you marry that with making plays. And that's big. I thought the interception, it was one of those things where he's playing center field. Will Rogers throws it way too far out ahead, and he's able to range over and pick it off. Those are the ball skills that I think coming into the year, it was a little wait and see. We heard a lot about him as, as kind of that box safety. We knew he was going to play the Lion. That's kind of what he was known for. But he's really shown that he can do it all over the course of this year. I think that's been a really big boost for Penn State this year. You talk about guys benefiting from a blowout. I think getting him to the sideline, getting Dejon Lane into the game to get some reps, take a little bit of a load off Jalen Reed. I think that was one of the benefits from tonight. When you think about winning by this margin and being able to dictate the terms of the competition for so long.
Yeah, that's a good point. Obviously, he didn't play the whole game because they emptied the bench there for that final defensive series. We saw some freshmen involved: Kenny Wosley at cornerback, Anthony Specca at linebacker, some of the more seldom used backups like Takari Nelson at linebacker, and Dejon Lane got a little more opportunity at safety toward the end of this matchup. But I think collectively, defensively, what stood out to me was we knew that Washington was coming in as kind of a hot team on the ground. They had a hot running back in Jonah Coleman. He finished with 11 carries for 24 yards. By far the most success that they had on the ground for Washington tonight was when they went to their backup quarterback, Damon Williams. And they found a spark with him at times. They were able to move the ball down the field a little bit. Didn't make a big difference on the scoreboard, but that was really when they were able to rack up some yards against Penn State. I think he had like a 40-yard run in the fourth quarter. But Coleman, back-to-back 100-yard games, 500-yard games through 9 weeks. Again, just 24 rushing yards in this matchup. And I think it's worth noting that they did this with a 3-man plan at defensive tackle when we're used to seeing them go 5 deep at defensive tackle. Akeem Beamon, no longer with this roster. He's a 6-year senior defensive tackle. confirmed that on Friday that he is not with Penn State anymore. We saw that on the field as well. So don't know the full story there, but an interesting departure. He was not getting as much work as maybe we thought he would going into the season. He also was a starter for half of last year, but getting like 10 snaps a game in Big Ten play. So he's not in the equation tonight. Keziah Izzard was listed as questionable. We didn't see him out there upon further review. And so Alonzo Ford continues to ascend in the plan here. He got a season high in snaps. He was the primary guy working alongside starters, Zane Durant and Devontae Thomas. And so I think it's notable that on a week where maybe you weren't playing with a full deck on your defensive interior, it wasn't noticeable. And they were able to do what they needed to do to make Will Rogers have to win the game. And when Washington figured out that wasn't an option, they had to go to their backup. It was a 5'10" kind of he's a run first quarterback based on what we saw today. And Penn State had its answers there. So what would you make of we talked a lot about the offense, but before we kind of wrap this conversation up, defensively, big picture, getting guys to the sideline late, but really exerting some dominance over the course of those 3.5 quarters. What do you think collectively about this body of work after a bit of a rough afternoon on the field? They gave up only 20 points to Ohio State. I think you'll take that. But they were lumped up on some of those possessions, including the last one against the Buckeyes.
I think when you look at the defense, what we saw tonight was what we saw earlier in the season in terms of that first drive. The opposing team gets some yards, strings some plays together, and then after that, you really clamp down. That opening drive was extended by a penalty on third down by Zion Tracy. It did look like that the defense was going to get off the field there on a 3rd and 14. Washington gets some new life from Tracy. Eventually they hold, and then Grady Gross doinks it off the upright to end that drive, which was fortunate for Penn State in terms of how you start a game. But I think this defense has a lot of pieces. I think you have a ton of guys who are playing at a high level. You mentioned Kobe King having a sack in back-to-back games. I thought he had a couple of really nice plays tonight ranging towards the sideline where he read something perfectly. And while it wasn't a tackle for a loss or a big play like that, it was just stopping someone for a minimal gain. And that's what you need. I just think that this group has settled in. I thought they came back after last week really determined. And I think that's something you can really hang your hat on moving forward.
Zion Tracy got the start today. Just another defensive note there. We had seen Cam Miller typically getting the start at the line position. Zion Tracy pick 6 against Ohio State. He was announced as a starter today. Was still more of a share than anything. Daniel, the other thing we should note, denied Dennis Sutton. I don't think we got to this last postgame podcast against Ohio State, but it was more of the same. Like against the Buckeyes, we saw him in some third down and passing, obvious passing down situations. We actually saw him in the game when it was 28-3 in the fourth quarter playing some defense. So I think whatever he's dealing with, and based on what we saw in Wisconsin, looks like lower body. It certainly looked like it may have been his groin. But if they're putting him on the field up by 25 in the fourth quarter, I think that's a sign that he is making the progress, and they're not necessarily afraid of a setback there. So to get him back full go by the time we get to that game against Minnesota in a couple of weeks, I think could be very important. Daniel, looking down the road a little bit, they've got a really bad Purdue team up next. They got to make the trip out to Indiana for that one. You never know in the Big Ten, but Purdue has been bad. They were blown out of the water by Ohio State. They have 1 win on the season. They've been bad. Probably the worst team in the conference. You would probably judge them. And then you've got this trip to Minnesota, which Minnesota just lost at Rutgers. That takes some of the wind out of their sails. They're 6-4. I know your beloved Maryland Terrapins are the last matchup of the regular season back here in Beaver Stadium. Maryland lost today to Oregon by a few touchdowns. That's going to be a heavily favored game for Penn State. It feels like they past this hurdle of how are they going to look coming off a loss? Are they going to let it? They did it very impressively. They win by 29 points here in Whiteout, and to me, it's the destination is back here in Beaver Stadium. This the weekend before the Christmas for a playoff game, because unless things get really weird in the Big Ten, you're not going to be in Indianapolis playing for the conference championship. That's just the way it shakes out right now. But all anticipation, and I felt comfortable enough to ask Kobe King, what would it mean to you to earn an opportunity to get another big time, maybe a prime time setting like you had tonight, but for a playoff game in late December. And he said that would probably be better than a whiteout. People might be cold, but he said people will be ecstatic. And so I think you got to take care of business. Want to know mentality is always going to prevail for this program. But I think it's really now in your mind's eye. It's really that carrot dangling from the stick, and you can see it getting closer and closer. Do people think it's cheapened because it's 12 teams instead of 4 teams? That's on them. You get a ticket to the show, and what you do with it from there depends on what you do with it. And right now, Penn State is on track to have that opportunity for the first time.
Yeah, I think that Penn State has turned itself and is directed towards the college football playoff right now. I know that I've talked about how Penn State has responded from losses over these past couple of years, and they haven't really let it snowball, and they've been in a good place. I was thinking about it a little bit more, and 2022 and 2023 were a little bit different, where in 2022 they lose at Michigan, come back, boat race Minnesota in the whiteout, then they have the loss to Ohio State. They come out and they just clean up the rest of the way schedule. Last year, it wasn't really like that. And it wasn't really like tonight, because last year they lose to Ohio State. Then they have that Indiana game where things just kind of got so bad that they had to chuck it deep. They had to, Drew Aller got forced into throwing it deep. And then after they lost to Michigan, the next week you had that Rutgers game where Drew Aller gets hurt. And even before then, it's just a very station to station game, some real ugly football at Beaver Stadium. And so for them to come out tonight and have it look a little bit more like it did in 2022, where you come out and you just immediately take care of business, I think that's a really, really good sign for them, where it didn't take them a week to get going, to ease back into things, to get back up to speed. I think they came out, they were ready to go. And with Purdue up next, even though like West Lafayette in the second or third weekend in November doesn't really sound like the most attractive destination, I think that that's somewhere where they'll be ready to go and be able to take care of business pretty well against a really bad team. So they're, I think, in a good spot right now. Really curious what the rankings look like on Tuesday with a couple losses ahead of them, whether or not Indiana will finally get the respect I think that the Hoosiers deserve, how that could make things look. But I think just right now, Penn State is just in a really, really nice spot coming off this whiteout win.
Penn State at number 6 for now. Number 2, Georgia picked up their second loss. They lost to Ole Miss. Number 4, Miami, no longer unbeaten. They lost to Georgia Tech. We saw LSU pick up their third loss, so that's another one biting the dust in the SEC. And meanwhile, you've got Penn State 8-1, and as we said, looking like a heavy favorite for the next 3. Can't take anything for granted, but I think a lot of fan bases would be willing to trade spots with a lot of you listeners and viewers right now at this stage of the season. So enjoy the ride. I think we got the Ohio State matchup a little bit further in the rearview mirror today, and that's probably good for everybody involved. 3 more matchups ahead. Daniel, always a pleasure closing up shop. I don't know if we'll have another late night like this. Maybe we will before Christmas come December, but it's 3:30 a.m. I don't know how many people are actually left in this building. There were at one point about 110,000 of them. It's one of the more unique things we do in this job is staying up late and staying in the stadium and writing and then talking about these games. But it's a pleasure to do it with you.
Love it, Tyler. So it's a great time of year, and I'm excited for 3, 4, however many more games we have this year.
We'll be back with another episode on Monday. We'll bring Mark Brennan in. We'll talk about what we witnessed tonight again in the game against Washington. We'll be fresh out of a press conference with James Franklin, and then we'll roll into our normal game week setup. You'll hear more about the recruiting results from tonight. There was a commitment and a very big one. We'll break that all down next week. You don't have to wait, though. Go over to Lions247.com for the latest in Penn State recruiting coverage, for the latest in game coverage. We've got a bunch of stories up already. We'll have our snap counts up pretty soon. A lot happening at Lions247.com. For Daniel Gallen, I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks for tuning in to our postgame podcast right here on the Lions 24/7 podcast.